Ever feel like your thoughts have a life of their own? Well, get ready for a wild ride because today we're diving into the world of thoughts, how they form, how they influence us, and how they even shape the world around us.
Yeah, those things we all have, like thousands of them a day.
Exactly. And to help us explore this topic, we're turning to Hans Wilhelm and his thought-provoking YouTube video titled Thoughts Are Alive.
Oh, yeah, his work is really interesting.
It is. And what we're going to do in this deep dive is really explore Wilhelm's concept that thoughts might actually be independent entities, not just abstract things happening in our heads.
Right, with their own energy and life force.
Yeah, like a separate being almost, which is a pretty wild concept.
It is, and it kind of makes you rethink how you view your own thoughts.
It totally does. So where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, Wilhelm starts by hitting us with the sheer volume of thoughts we have each day.
Like how many are we talking about here?
Oh, man, get this. Researchers estimate that the average person has somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 thoughts per day.
Wow. That's a lot of mental chatter.
It is, and to make matters even crazier, most of these thoughts are repetitive.
Oh yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Getting stuck in those thought loops can be so frustrating.
It's like having the same song on repeat in your head all day long.
Totally. So if we have all these thoughts swirling around,
Yeah.
how do they go from being these abstract things to something more?
That's where Wilhelm's analogy of the architect in the house comes in.
Okay, I'm listening.
So imagine an architect who has an idea for a house.
Got it.
That initial idea is like a seed, a very abstract thought.
Huh?
But as the architect starts to focus on that idea, adding details like windows, doors, and rooms, the thought becomes more concrete.
So it starts to take shape.
Exactly. It eventually transforms into a two-dimensional blueprint,
Right.
and then finally into a three-dimensional reality.
So he's saying that the more we focus on a thought, the more energy we give it,
Yeah.
and that can lead to it manifesting in some way.
Yes, and it's not just about physical manifestations either. Wilhelm believes that our thoughts can shape our emotions, our behaviors, and even our overall reality.
That's a powerful idea.
It is. And he even suggests that our planet Earth itself could be a manifested thought form.
Okay, now that's a mind-blowing concept.
Right. I mean, if you think about it, it's not that far-fetched.
I guess when you consider the scale of the universe, anything is possible.
Exactly. So if our thoughts are so powerful, where do they even come from and what happens to them after they pop into our heads?
Yeah, I've always wondered about that.
Well, the origin of thoughts is something philosophers have been debating for centuries.
Right?
But Wilhelm focuses on what happens after that initial spark.
Makes sense. So what does he say?
He argues that as we think a thought, it gains strength attracting similar thoughts almost like magnets.
Oh, like it tracks as...
Precisely. So let's say you're worried about a presentation at work.
Okay, I can relate to that.
That worry could attract other anxieties about your job performance or what your boss thinks of you.
Yeah, it can spiral pretty quickly.
It can. And these clusters of similar thoughts, Wilhelm calls them thought complexes, can gain momentum, creating a sort of vortex.
The vortex of negativity.
Yeah, or it could be positive if the thoughts are positive.
So it's like a feedback loop, either amplifying the good or the bad.
Exactly. And that explains why it's so easy to get stuck in those negative spirals. One anxious thought seems to lead to another, and before you know it, you're overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's like your mind is a runaway train.
Exactly. But here's where things get even more interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Wilhelm introduces this idea that the universe itself is this vast communication system constantly sending and receiving vibrations.
Whoa.
And get this, our thoughts are part of that system.
So our thoughts are like little signals bouncing around the cosmos.
That's the idea, and it gets even weirder.
Weirder how?
Remember those thought complexes we were talking about?
The clusters of similar thoughts.
Yes. Wilhelm suggests that they can eventually return to the sender.
Like a boomerang.
You got it. So if you keep dwelling on that negative thought about your presentation, it might actually come back to you with even more force.
Yikes. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It can be, which is why it's so important to be aware of what we're thinking and the energy we're putting out there.
Okay, now I'm starting to understand why we need to pay attention to our thoughts.
It's about recognizing the potential impact they have, not just on ourselves, but on the world around us.
This idea of a thought boomerang is a bit unsettling. Is there any way to protect ourselves from these potentially negative thought forms?
That's a great question, and fortunately, Wilhelm offers some insights into how we might manage these negative thought patterns, which is something we can dig into a little bit later.
Okay, I definitely want to hear more about that. But first, I think we need to take a quick break.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a few minutes to explore some strategies for dealing with those pesky thought boomerangs.
Stay tuned.
So those negative thought boomerangs, they're a little freaky.
Yeah, they can be a little unnerving.
Definitely. So what can we do about those?
Well, one thing that Wilhelm really stresses is that we're not just dealing with our own thoughts here.
Oh,
We can also be influenced by thoughts coming from outside of us.
wait, so other people's thoughts can affect us?
That's what he suggests.
Oh,
Well, he says we're especially vulnerable to these really large thought complexes, especially the negative ones.
okay.
And these can come from all sorts of places, like other people, obviously, uh, groups, the media, even something he calls negative astral spheres. I'm not entirely sure what those are.
Negative astral spheres. That sounds kind of spooky.
Yeah, it's a little out there, but I've definitely had experiences where I've walked into a room and felt this like heavy energy,
Oh,
you know?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like everyone's stressed or anxious or something.
Exactly. And Wilhelm would say that you're actually picking up on those negative thought
Because
forms.
it's not just my imagination.
He'd say no, that you're actually sensing those thought forms.
Interesting. So what do these thought forms look like?
Well, this is where it gets kind of wild. Wilhelm actually describes negative thought forms as looking like grotesque, sewer-like entities. Ew, that's disgusting. I know, right? But he says that positive thoughts have this beautiful, radiant glow.
Okay, so it's like a visual representation of good versus evil.
Kind of, and it makes sense, right? If you're constantly surrounded by those sewer-like thought forms, it's going to have a negative impact on you.
Yeah, I can see that. So how do we protect ourselves from those negative thought forms? And how do we cultivate more of those positive, glowing ones?
Well, Wilhelm has a few suggestions. One of the most interesting is the idea of blessing.
Blessing. Like sending good vibes to people?
Exactly. He talks about Meher Baba, who taught to bless the living crap out of everyone.
Bless the living crap out of everyone. I like that.
Right. It's a pretty powerful idea.
But how does it actually work? Is it just about thinking good thoughts?
It's more than just thinking. It's about intentionally sending those positive thoughts outwards, almost like a beam of light.
Oh, so you're directing the positive energy towards someone or something specific.
Yes, and Wilhelm believes that these blessings not only counteract negativity, but can also have a ripple effect.
A ripple effect.
Yeah, so your positive thoughts can actually influence others in a positive way.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It is. But what about when we're struggling with our own negative thoughts?
Yeah, like what are some tools we can use in those situations?
Well, Wilhelm actually recommends using Byron Katie's 4 questions.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of her. She's the one who developed the work, right?
Yes, exactly. It's a process where you ask 4 really simple but powerful questions about any thought that's causing you stress.
Yeah, and I think she has a website with tons of resources on it.
She does, and it's a really great resource. And along with those tools, Wilhelm also emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and stillness.
Mindfulness and stillness. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's about becoming more aware of your thoughts, observing them without judgment, and learning to detach from the negative ones.
So it's like creating some space between you and your thoughts.
Exactly. You start to realize that you're not your thoughts. You're the observer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And once you can observe your thoughts, you can make conscious choices about which ones to engage with.
Right. You can choose to limit your exposure to negative media or spend less time with people who drain your energy.
It's like taking control of your mental diet.
Exactly. You wouldn't eat junk food all day and expect to feel good, so why would you feed your mind a steady diet of negativity?
That's a great analogy. And it leads to another point that Wilhelm brings up that I found really fascinating.
What's that?
He actually claims that thoughts can influence not just our own genes, but also the genes of a developing baby in the womb.
Wow, so our thoughts could potentially impact future generations.
That's what he suggests. He mentions a book called The Cause and Development of All Illness by Gabriel that goes into more detail about this.
It's an interesting concept, for sure.
It is. So it's not just about feeling good. Our thoughts could have a real impact on our health, our relationships, the world around us, and maybe even the future.
That's what Wilhelm's work seems to suggest.
Wow, it's a lot to take in.
It is. The main takeaway here is the power of awareness. We need to become more conscious of the thoughts we're thinking, the thoughts we're exposed to, and the thoughts we're sending out into the world.
It's about taking responsibility for our mental landscape.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean we have to strive for some impossible ideal of never having a negative thought.
Right, we're all human.
Exactly. We all have those moments of fear, worry, anger. It's what we do with those thoughts that matters.
So do we dwell on them, let them multiply, or do we acknowledge them, question them, and choose to focus on something more positive?
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices. recognizing that we have more control over our thoughts than we realize.
So how do we start making those choices? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the first step is really cultivating that awareness we've been talking about. It's like developing a mental muscle. The more we practice, the stronger it becomes.
So things like meditation, journaling, even just taking a few minutes each day to sit quietly and observe our thoughts can help.
Absolutely. And there are so many resources available these days, books, apps, online communities. It's about finding what works for you and making it a part of your daily routine.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Right. But even small shifts in our thinking can make a big difference.
I agree. And that brings us to maybe the most important question of all. If thoughts are truly these potent forces that can shape our lives and the world around us, what responsibility do we have for the thoughts we create?
That's a powerful question, and it's one that each of us needs to answer for ourselves.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We've only scratched the surface here. Hans Wilhelm goes into much more detail in his video, so we encourage you to check it out if you're interested in learning more. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us. It really is a powerful question.
It makes you think, about all the thoughts we're putting out there.
For sure. It's like, what are we contributing to, you know?
Yeah, to the collective kind of soup of thoughts, I guess you could say.
Collective soup of thoughts. I like that.
Yeah, and maybe it's not just about our own little gardens.
Right? It's like we're all part of this bigger ecosystem.
Exactly. And like we were saying before, it's not about never having a negative thought.
Yeah, that's impossible.
Totally. We're human rights.
Yeah, we have all those emotions, the good and the bad.
The full spectrum.
But maybe it's about looking at those negative thoughts differently.
Like how?
Well, instead of beating ourselves up for having them, maybe we can see them as opportunities.
Opportunities for what?
For growth. For practice.
Ah, I see. So every time we have a negative thought, it's a chance to use those tools we talked about.
Like questioning the thought, sending out a blessing, choosing to focus on something positive.
Right. Like a little mental workout.
Exactly. Building those mental muscles.
Yeah, and making those choices over and over again.
It's like we're creating a new path, a new way of thinking.
Creating a better mental landscape.
For ourselves and for everyone around us.
It's a pretty amazing thought when you really think about it.
It is. It's empowering.
It's like realizing that we have more control than we thought we did.
It's not about denying the negative. It's about knowing that we have the power to choose something different.
To choose a different path.
And those choices, even the small ones, they can ripple out and affect so much.
Far beyond ourselves.
That's a beautiful idea.
It really is. And I think that's a good place to wrap things up.
I agree. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Me too. And hopefully our listeners feel the same way.
Remember, your thoughts matter.
Choose them wisely.
This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.